In an earlier lesson back in Module 1, when we were learning about the genre of drama, we talked about how to make a scene. Then we defined a scene as a unit of drama that happens in one place at one time. But an understanding of how to make a scene will help us not only when we write drama, but also when we write fiction, nonfiction, or poetry. Because of the differences in the formatting of those 4 genres of creative writing we're experimenting with this semester, those scenes will look different in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry than they do in drama. But if you look for them, you'll find them in all the genres, and particularly in the genre of fiction, which we're concentrating on now in Module 2. So, what will you first look for when you look for a scene in the fiction written by the masters who have come before you? And what will you later want to make when you make a scene in the fiction you write? As a reminder, in that earlier lesson, we talked about a handful of elements that make a scene. First, we want to establish a setting. That is both the time and the place, the when and the where of the story you want to tell. Then, we want to populate that setting with characters. Those are the people, the who in your story. After that, we want those characters to take actions and to exchange dialogue. Those are the what's in your story. The actions are what the characters do, and the dialogue is what the characters say. Here, I should point out that prose or poetry more readily lend themselves to authors also incorporating thoughts than drama. That is, the what the characters think. If you're keeping track of all the W words we've covered so far, when, where, who, and what, you may have noticed that we haven't yet talked about the other traditional 2, the why and how. We'll start to think about those a little later in this module on fiction when we read the story Happy Endings by Margaret Atwood, which is, in part, meant to make a perceptive point about the differences between a mere plot and a true story. As a preview, Atwood will argue that a plot is just one thing after another, a what and a what and a what, while story delves into the how and why. But back to our list of elements that make a scene. Finally, to make our story more interesting to our readers, we want that combination of actions and dialogue and thoughts to create suspense, that type of anxiety we feel when we don't know what's going to happen next. So yes, that's a lot of what so far. What the characters do, what the characters say, what the characters think, and what's going to happen next. But again, we'll get past those to how and why in a little while. As far as what this sort of scene looks like in fiction, the first story I want you to take a look at as we transition from drama to fiction is Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway. That's because, although it is formatted as a piece of prose fiction, it is structured similarly to a piece of drama. That is, at the very top of the first page, Hemingway gives us a description of the setting, as well as lists the 2 main characters in this scene. After that, the rest of the story is essentially an extended dialogue exchange between those 2 characters, interrupted occasionally by actions that are described in only a little more detail than they would be in the stage directions in the types of play scripts we read in Module 1. Of course, these elements are formatted differently than they would have been if Hemingway wrote this as a drama instead. But if you look for them in this piece of fiction, you will be able to find them. When we discuss Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants as a class, we'll talk in a greater degree of detail about these similarities of the scenes we have read in drama and in fiction, as well as about the differences in their formatting. More importantly, though, we will also talk about what makes a good scene, whether it's formatted as drama, fiction, nonfiction, or poetry. I look forward to hearing what you have to say about all that. And, on that note, end scene.